She was the embodiment of grace, a face sculpted by angels, a voice as soft as whispered prayers. On screen, she was purity made flesh, Hollywood's saint in silk gowns. But behind those radiant eyes, Loretta Young carried a secret so heavy it nearly crushed her soul. She won an Oscar. She had millions of fans. She never missed Sunday Mass. And yet, she spent decades lying to her own daughter about who her father was. Because if the truth came out, it would destroy her career, her faith, and the image she had built so carefully. They said she was the most moral woman in show business. But morality, in Hollywood, is often just another costume. In a world that prized perfection, she chose silence. And that silence echoed louder than any scandal could. This is the untold story of Loretta Young, the star who preached virtue but lived with a sin the church and the studios could never fully forgive. She stepped into the light long before Hollywood had learned to dim it. Loretta Young was just 3 years old when she made her screen debut, a cherub-faced child wandering into the moving pictures during the silent film era. By the time she was a teenager, she had already accumulated more film credits than most adults twice her age. But it wasn't until the 1930s that the world truly saw her. Not just as a working actress, but as a cinematic vision. Tall, slender, with high cheekbones and eyes that shimmered with innocence, Loretta seemed almost too perfect for the corrupted world of show business. Her beauty was luminous, but not ostentatious. Her voice was gentle, each word delivered with a kind of poised sincerity that made every role feel like an extension of her very soul. In a time when sex appeal reigned, she exuded restraint, mystery, and reverence. The press called her the Virgin Queen of Hollywood. Fan magazines adored her. Publicists painted her as the modern-day Madonna, a woman of unwavering faith, immaculate in both appearance and morality. She dressed modestly, prayed often, and refused to play roles she deemed inappropriate. No smut, no scandal, no compromise. Her Catholic faith wasn't just personal, it was performative, embedded in her public image as deeply as her smile. Behind the scenes, producers and directors praised her professionalism. She was punctual, prepared, and always polite. Loretta was the kind of actress studios could count on, not just to show up, but to sell. Her on-screen presence was both commanding and comforting, a rare alchemy that resonated across generations. She worked with Hollywood's finest, Spencer Tracy, Tyrone Power, Cary Grant, and she held her own. In 1947, she delivered a performance in The Farmer's Daughter that earned her an Academy Award for Best Actress, a moment that seemed to affirm everything the industry had built her up to be. Talented, deserving, and morally untouchable, she was also a pioneer. In the 1950s, Loretta became one of the first major film stars to transition successfully into television. The Loretta Young Show wasn't just a vehicle for her talents, it was a brand, a weekly communion with American households. Each episode began with Loretta sweeping through a doorway in a dazzling gown, offering viewers a soft-spoken moral tale wrapped in elegance and empathy. She didn't just act, she preached softly and sweetly to millions of Americans who saw her as a moral compass. Even as Hollywood shifted into grittier territory, Loretta remained untouched by the grime. Unlike other actresses whose careers withered with age or scandal, she sustained her aura, untarnished, revered, pristine. But behind that glow was discipline bordering on obsession. Her public image was no accident. It was manufactured with the precision of a military campaign. She screened scripts meticulously, supervised her wardrobe choices, and demanded control over every frame she appeared in. Not to feed vanity, but to maintain the illusion. Because she understood something most actresses learned too late. In Hollywood, perception is everything. And sin, real or rumored, could end a career overnight. So she stayed devout. She stayed immaculate. She stayed silent. Loretta Young was the woman every mother wanted their daughter to become, and every man wanted but dared not defile. She was Hollywood's angel. Or at least, that's what they wanted to believe. Behind the immaculate image of Loretta Young, the devout Catholic, the moral icon, the Hollywood saint, was a secret she locked so deeply inside herself that not even her closest friends could speak of it. It was a secret that haunted her for decades, one born not of lust or scandalous rebellion, but of silence and fear. In 1935, Loretta was 22 years old and cast opposite Clark Gable in The Call of the Wild. Gable was older, married, and already a megastar with a reputation for charm that masked a crueler core. On set, Loretta was polite, guarded, and careful, everything she had been trained to be. But something happened during that shoot. Something unspoken. Something never admitted, but always implied. Loretta became pregnant. In a time when unwed motherhood could end a woman's career, and in her case, shatter a carefully constructed image of piety and restraint, Loretta disappeared. The studio, in collusion with the press and the Catholic Church, orchestrated a cover-up that was as elaborate as it was heartbreaking. She vanished from the public eye for months under the guise of a vacation and quietly gave birth to a daughter named Judy Lewis. To protect her image and avoid the wrath of her faith and fans, Loretta arranged for Judy to be placed in an orphanage. Months later, in a carefully choreographed move, she adopted her own child. The public believed it. So did Judy. For years. But the truth never stayed hidden forever. Judy grew up with features that raised eyebrows, large ears, striking eyes, a jawline that didn't match her mother's delicate face. Hollywood insiders whispered, fans speculated. But Loretta never confirmed anything, not even to her daughter. The deception was thorough. When Judy needed her ears pinned back at age 7, it was at Loretta's insistence. An attempt to erase the most visible sign of her real paternity. The surgery wasn't just cosmetic. It was symbolic, a denial etched in cartilage. Throughout her childhood, Judy felt like she was being tolerated, not loved. Loretta raised her with strict Catholic discipline, alternating between moments of maternal warmth and distant control. There were rules, curfews, catechism, but never truth. Judy wasn't allowed to ask about her father, and Loretta, when pressed, only ever said, "He wasn't a good man." The pain of that half-truth followed Judy into adulthood. It wasn't until she was in her 30s that she confronted Loretta directly, demanding to know the truth. And even then, Loretta hesitated. Eventually, in a moment of quiet confession, Loretta admitted it. Clark Gable was Judy's father. But even then, she never said the word rape. It wasn't until decades later, when Judy wrote her memoir, Uncommon Knowledge, that the world began to understand the depth of Loretta's trauma. In a posthumous interview released years after Loretta's death, her close friend and biographer, Linda Lewis, revealed what Loretta had only dared whisper near the end of her life. That what happened between her and Gable was not consensual. That it was, by the standards of her time, and even more so by today's, an assault. But Loretta never said the word herself. Her Catholicism didn't leave room for that. To accuse a man of rape, especially one as beloved as Gable, would be to bring scandal upon herself, her daughter, and her God. So she buried it. She repackaged it as a mistake, a moment of weakness, a sin between me and God. And she paid penance for the rest of her life. Her relationship with Judy remained strained. Though they eventually reconciled, the wounds of deception ran deep. Judy often spoke about the confusion of growing up in a house where the truth was a ghost that no one dared name. Loretta, for all her grace and poise, carried that ghost until her final breath. This hidden past doesn't erase her talent, her faith, or her legacy, but it reshapes it. It forces us to see Loretta not as a woman who lied, but as a woman forced to survive a system that gave her no other choice. Because in 1935, a young Catholic actress couldn't be a victim. She could only be a sinner, and sinners had to repent. Quietly, after the birth of her daughter and the orchestrated charade of adoption, Loretta Young stood at a crossroads, one foot in personal catastrophe, the other still firmly planted on the stage of Hollywood make-believe. She could vanish, like so many actresses whose reputations crumbled under the weight of moral scrutiny. Or she could rebuild, more immaculate, more disciplined, more untouchable than ever before. She chose the second path, but reinvention, in Loretta's case, was not a glamorous makeover. It was war. A slow, meticulous erasure of anything that could be construed as scandal. The young woman who had once blushed under the hot lights of scandal became a woman of stone-faced grace. Every step she took afterward was strategic, every word rehearsed, every smile weaponized to protect what remained of her name. Loretta didn't just return to acting. She resurrected herself as a symbol of virtue. Her roles became increasingly maternal, moralistic, dignified. The scripts she accepted were filtered through a rigid sense of decorum. No sultry characters, no risque dialogue, nothing that might invite suspicion or rumor. On camera, she became the woman she longed to be off-screen. Unblemished, in control, holy. She also began attending Mass more regularly, donating to Catholic charities, and becoming a public advocate for clean living. If her past threatened to claw its way back, she would drown it in good deeds. Loretta wasn't just playing a role anymore. She was enacting a lifelong performance of redemption. But the greatest stage for this performance came not from the silver screen, but from a television screen. In 1953, The Loretta Young Show debuted and quickly became a staple of American living rooms. Each week, Loretta would glide into frame in a designer gown, radiating elegance and serenity, and introduce a story that often revolved around ethical dilemmas, family values, or quiet heroism. It was a perfect disguise. Under the banner of storytelling, she was preaching, softly, beautifully, the gospel of her own reformation. Behind the scenes, she exerted tight creative control. She had final say on scripts, costumes, lighting. Nothing was aired without her approval. She even monitored the background music, ensuring it matched the emotional tone she wanted the audience to feel. Her attention to detail bordered on obsessive, but it was all part of the mission: to become unassailable. Colleagues began to notice something else. Loretta didn't just act anymore. She curated, controlled, dictated. She wasn't interested in fame for its own sake. She was building a fortress around her image. One studio executive once joked, "She doesn't need a publicist. She is her own Vatican." But even fortresses have cracks. There were moments, fleeting ones, where the mask slipped. On rare occasions, during interviews or on set, she would grow silent when asked about motherhood or her early years in the industry. A flash of something unreadable would pass through her eyes. Fear, perhaps, or regret. But she never let it linger. She forged friendships carefully, with people she could trust to maintain the fiction, and she avoided parties, red carpets, and gossip columns. Hollywood, for her, was no longer a playground. It was a confessional, and every appearance was penance. Still, the world kept changing. The 1960s brought new freedoms, new voices, new women who refused to be boxed into saintly archetypes. But Loretta remained steadfast, almost defiantly out of touch with the era's rebellion. She never wore miniskirts. She never marched. Her reinvention was not about liberation. It was about preservation. And yet, for all the control she wielded, Loretta could never fully escape the shadow of her past. She watched as whispers resurfaced, as gossip magazines dropped veiled hints about her daughter's parentage. As Judy grew into a woman with questions she could no longer ignore. In public, Loretta stayed composed. In private, she panicked. The reinvention had worked, for a time. She had gone from the girl with a scandal to the woman with a halo. But halos are fragile things. They're made of light. And light, when pressed too hard, begins to fracture. Still, she persisted. Even into retirement, Loretta clung to the image she had built like a rosary, each bead a memory polished clean, each prayer a silent plea to be remembered not for her sins, but for her strength. In truth, her reinvention was less about deception than it was about survival. Because in the Hollywood of the 1930s and 40s, a woman who told the truth about her trauma wasn't seen as brave. She was seen as broken. And Loretta Young refused to be broken. Loretta Young didn't collapse in the way Hollywood stories usually end. There was no overdose, no public scandal, no last desperate plea for relevance. She faded, gently, like a candle placed under a glass dome, still burning, but unseen. She lived to the age of 87, passing away quietly in 2000 from ovarian cancer. Her death was noted, respectfully, by the press. Tributes recalled her elegance, her faith, her contributions to film and television. There were few mentions of controversy. The myth had held, and yet her legacy is not simple. To some, she remains a paragon of grace, an actress who defied Hollywood's moral decay by living a life rooted in faith and dignity. Her performances still captivate, her style still inspires, and the Loretta Young Show remains a relic of television's golden age. But for others, she is a symbol of something deeper. A woman who lived in a time that offered her no safe path, who was punished for something done to her, and then punished again for hiding it. Who chose silence not out of shame, but out of survival. Loretta Young's legacy is not a straight line. It is a loop of contradictions, between virtue and secrecy, between maternal instinct and imposed denial, between personal trauma and public perfection. In the end, she didn't vanish. She became a whisper, a caution. A woman remembered not just for what she showed the world, but for what she never dared to say. The peak of Loretta Young's career was not marked by a single moment of triumph, but by a prolonged glow. She didn't rise in a blaze. She endured. As Hollywood evolved, as starlets came and went, Loretta remained, serene, consistent, seemingly untouched by time or controversy. She had become not just an actress, but a relic of grace, a living monument to a more decent era. In 1947, her performance in The Farmer's Daughter stunned even those who had long admired her poise. The film was a political comedy with teeth, and Loretta brought to it not just charm, but conviction. She played a working-class Swedish-American housemaid who becomes a congresswoman, an unlikely heroine in a male-dominated world. And she played it with elegance, grit, and a sly intelligence that critics hadn't seen from her before. The role won her an Academy Award for Best Actress. It should have been a moment of unburdening, a release. A sign that she had been forgiven, if not by God, then at least by the industry. But the gold of the Oscar only reflected the shadows she kept hidden, because behind that glittering statue was a truth she could never acknowledge. The very child she had once concealed was now growing up, asking questions, needing answers. And Loretta's ability to control the narrative was slipping. In public, she continued her ascent. The Loretta Young Show became a primetime hit, running from 1953 to 1961 and earning 3 Emmys along the way. Audiences didn't just watch her, they believed in her. Her presence on television felt maternal, moral, and strangely sacred. While other stars faded, divorced, self-destructed, or sold scandal to stay relevant, Loretta remained untouchable. Or so it seemed. Privately, the price of that pristine image was mounting. Raising Judy Lewis in secret had created a strange and painful dynamic. Judy wasn't allowed to call Loretta mom in public. At home, their relationship was chilly, dictated by rules rather than affection. Judy once said she grew up feeling more like a doll than a daughter, posed, dressed, directed, but never embraced. And as Judy entered adolescence, the resemblance to Clark Gable became undeniable. The questions came harder. Why do I look different? Why won't you tell me who my father is? Loretta, devout to the end, refused to lie outright, but she also refused to speak the truth. The tension simmered beneath their home like a fault line. And it would crack eventually. But there were other costs, too. Loretta's obsession with image had become a cage. She avoided deep friendships, shunned Hollywood parties, and lived in a constant state of vigilance. Even her romantic life suffered. Though she was married briefly to producer Tom Lewis, the marriage lacked intimacy and eventually dissolved. Loretta had built her life around purity, but purity is lonely. Her body began to betray her. She developed Bell's palsy in the late 1960s, which temporarily paralyzed part of her face, a cruel twist of fate for someone whose beauty had been her currency. Though she recovered, the experience left her shaken. Her sense of control over her body, her emotions, her legacy was beginning to slip. She retired quietly from acting and public life in the early 1970s. The world moved on. Hollywood, once dazzled by her poise, turned its gaze to younger stars with louder stories. The industry she had given her life to barely looked back. But the final blow came not from a studio, but from her own daughter. In 1994, Judy Lewis published Uncommon Knowledge, a memoir that laid bare the truth Loretta had worked a lifetime to bury. In it, Judy described her lonely childhood, her confusion, and the pain of being denied a mother's full love. She confirmed that Clark Gable was her biological father. And she described Loretta's silence not as cruelty, but as fear masquerading as piety. The book shook what remained of Loretta's reputation. Some sympathized, others recoiled. For decades, she had told the world how to live, how to believe, how to behave. And now, it seemed, she had built her cathedral on a foundation of omission. Loretta never publicly responded to the book. She did, however, reconcile with Judy in private. In her final years, she softened. The armor cracked. There were moments, brief but real, where she allowed herself to be simply a mother, not a saint. Not a symbol, just a woman who had made a terrible decision in a terrible time. And in that quiet reconciliation, she found a measure of peace. But it had come too late to undo the decades of damage. Loretta Young reached heights most actresses only dream of: an Oscar, Emmys, national reverence. But her greatest achievement was also her heaviest burden: the ability to maintain a perfect lie for almost an entire lifetime.